بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله اللهم علمنا من علمك ما ترضى به عنا ولا تؤاخذنا بما تعلمه منا يا حليم خلقنا بخلق الحلم وحققنا بحقائق العلم سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي صلى الله عليه وسلم محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. I forgot to record, so you're gonna have to add the other one from the other one. Inshallah. Add one job. Jazakumullah khair, everyone, for coming to another week where we're reading from Ibn Qudama's Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin. We are finishing up the section that talked about the rights of brothers, the rights of Muslims, the rights of neighbors. And subhanAllah, the last bit of this talks about the rights of your family and the rights of kinship. And it's interesting that this comes at the tail end of a entire chapter focusing on suhbah, focusing on companionship, focusing on friends. Then now, after covering all that, family came at the end and not the first. And when I was reflecting on this, like, why would originally Imam al-Ghazali, because as we talked about many times before, this is a summary of a larger book that condensed Imam al-Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin. So Imam al-Ghazali, 505 Hijri, wrote Ihya Ulumuddin. Ibn Jawzi, who's about a century later, wrote Minhaj al-Qasidin, and then Ibn Qudama summarized it. So why would he put the rights of family at the end of talking about the rights of brothers and Muslims and otherwise? Wallahu a'lam, it's interesting to me because family are the ones whom we usually know how to spend time with. But also, those are some of the people whom we find the biggest challenges with. And so you'll see from the ahadith the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, or that Imam Ibn Qudama mentions in taking from, he mentions here, are very, very serious, very, very strong. And I think that that's also interesting because the next section right after it is how to be in social isolation. So like we have how to be with other people externally and how to be internally when you're isolated from others. And the section between that separates how to be in isolation and how to be with people is how to be with family. That's like the first step before you go by yourself. You know, Imam al-Ghazali, he mentions in the Ihya that the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. You will never attain piety until you give from that which you love. And in reality, when we're talking about being with family, it's full of sacrifice. It's full of giving your convenience, the luxuries, the time, the things that you oftentimes have no problem doing with your friends when it comes time to doing with our family. That's where we're going to be challenged the most. And so this coming at the end of that is beautiful because it's going to require all of us to look internally and look at ourselves, but also we will be able to see, inshallah, how important keeping our ties of kinship and family are, and how meritorious, how rewarding that is. قال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى ونفعنا الله بعلوم في الدارين. The author, may Allah be pleased with him and allow us to benefit from his knowledge in this life and next, he says in the chapter of the rights of family and kinship. He says, as for the rights of family and kinship, then we have the hadith that comes in authority of Aisha radiallahu anha, where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that the rahim, the womb or the kinship that we have is connected by the arsh, the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when and it's said that when they say, man tusilni wasalahu Allah, whoever keeps those ties, those times of kinship, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will keep those connection with him. And whoever cuts them off will cut off their connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so what Imam Ibn Qudama is talking about here, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying that these rights of kinship, of our family, are directly connected to our rights to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how it is that we connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's interesting because the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam also said, whoever doesn't thank the people hasn't thanked Allah. Whoever doesn't thank the people hasn't thanked Allah. There's a direct connection between how we are with others and how we are with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then the Prophet ﷺ continues, the Imam Ibn Qudama mentioned another hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, where someone came to the Prophet ﷺ and said that he has some family members that he's connected to, but they've cut him off. He has family that he keeps the ties of kinship, but they have cut him off. And he's good to them, and they are bad to him. And he treats them respectfully, and they retreat him ignorantly. So imagine this situation here. We all have family. We all understand the interesting interconnectedness that we have as a family. Where you have someone that is family, that you keep that tie, but they're consistently mean to you, they're consistently bad to you, or they've cut you off completely. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, if it's truly as you say, you feeding them, then you are like the one who feeds them hot coals. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will continue to keep an aid with you as long as you are good to them, or as long as you continue in that way. Well, the Prophet ﷺ is saying that you are now in a state of goodness. That by you doing that, you're only feeding them hot coals. You're only giving them a situation that they can't respond to and that will only harm them. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And by doing that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends an aid for you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in your aid as long as you are that way. So now we have to reframe how we think of our entire relationships with family. And Ibn Qudami mentions there are many different ahadith that talk about keeping the ties of kinship and the rights of the parents, and specifically the rights of mothers. How do we reframe? How do we show up for our family? Do we merely put up with our family? And we'll talk about traumatic situations. So anyone who's like thinking about like, well, this person's abusive. Like, we're not talking about that. But we're talking about just being with family. Can we reframe how we think about family to being a source of ibadah, a source of worship, a source of obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a source of following the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and not an obligation? And wallahi, as someone who does marriage counseling, I see this to be a fundamental problem in spouses. That they treat each other either seeking reciprocity, hoping that you scratch my back, I scratch yours, so I'm going to do this for you, and so I'm hoping that you do the same for me. Or, worse, their relationship with their spouse is completely based on their expectations. So I'm going to show up to you, or I'm show up with you, hoping that you fulfill all the needs that I have. I just had dinner before with a couple, mashallah, we were talking about this. They, particularly young people, so like really pay attention to this. You think that getting married is going to solve all your issues. You're lonely, you get married, khalas, it's done. You have physical desires, get married, done, taken care of, check. You want to have affection and warmth and care and love, you got married, check. So when someone's having a bad day and they're a little bit grumpy, well, what happened? I'm disappointed now because you're not treating me the way that I expect. Or worse, you have in your head a means that they're supposed to treat you. And you can use this not only for romantic relationships, but also family relationships as well. You have an idea of what that relationship should look like. You haven't communicated it. You haven't explained what it is. But you think that this is what it is. Whether due to your entitlement, due to Hollywood or Bollywood, or whatever it may be, you think the relationship should be this way. And because they don't show up exactly how you want them to, now you're frustrated. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. I cooked them a cake a year ago. How could dare they treat me that way? La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. I helped them that one time. Or why would they, even worse, if we're so arrogant to think, well, don't they know who I am? I'm their cousin. They shouldn't treat me that way. I'm their son. I'm their sibling. Why would they do that to me? They didn't think about my needs. The reality is that we have to shift that framing to be, well, how can I serve them? Because wallahi, 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 the relationship in love in general, across the board, from my experience, is paradoxical. It's where you give, that you are selfless, and you get in return. And by doing that, you create a cyclical nature where everyone is trying to serve the other one, and now you're competing in trying to be in goodness for each other. And we see this in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. You will never attain piety until you give that which you love. You will never attain piety, a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, until you sacrifice the things that are closest to us. If this is our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for what about the khalq? What about the creation? We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be more mindful of our relationships, to shift them from being relationships that are completely based off of material reciprocity, where we want to get what we have given, to then being an opportunity to serve. And if it becomes an opportunity to serve, how is our framing and our thinking about that relationship now? How much more patient are we willing to be with people whose dispositions or personalities don't align well with ours? How much more generous are we for someone that we know they've been good to us in the past? How much more gracious are we with someone who we know is human just like us? And the closer that these relationships are, the more important that becomes, contrary to how we oftentimes are nowadays. With our friends, we're amazing. With our family, it's like, ugh, I got to deal with you. Outside the house, and all, maybe you guys don't do it, but you all have siblings who do. So, outside the house, generous, kind, spending time. With your parents, it's like, ugh, dinner time. Or, fine, I'll help with this. When the reality is they have the most, a bigger right on us than our friends do. And we need to ask ourselves, why is it that the relationships outside the house, when everyone's looking, where we can potentially gain status, when we could potentially gain fame by the acts that we do, we prioritize over the people who bore us, over the people that have blood connections with us. Now, before we get into the rights of children, again, this is not talking about abusive situations. This is not talking about where people are intentionally, even unintentionally, going to extremes beyond the pale, where they are completely disconcerted or completely don't care about our needs, or even worse, are harmful to us. They are beating us black and blue. They're verbally abusive or toxic. Those are outside the norms. When Islam talks about keeping the ties of kinship, it's talking about a normative family circumstance. There are times you're going to have difficulties and hardship, and you may say something they don't like, and they may say something you don't like, and that's going to happen. But now when it starts to become abusive, and this is abusive by objective standards, not because it hurt my feelings, right? Abusive by objective, someone's putting you down, trying to belittle you. Someone is trying to shame you. Someone is trying to beat you down with their words or their fists. May Allah protect us and forgive all of us. Those situations, my suggestion is that you stay away to the amount that is needed for you to be safe. You distance yourself to the amount that is required. They're still kin. And so maybe I need to pull back a little bit, because when I'm in this person's presence, everything they say is down-putting. And I've tried to do islah. I've tried to do reconciliation. I've tried to ask for nasihah. I've asked family and friends and counselors and imams to help this, but they don't seem to understand. Then khalas, you pull back based on the requirements. Don't completely cut them off if you don't have to. So maybe seeing them every day is not healthy. You see them once or twice a week. Maybe visiting every single weekend doesn't, but you go once or twice a month. You pull back, hoping that inshallah it keeps you safe, but even more important, an opportunity arises where you can discuss what your needs are and how you felt. So again, when Islam talks about the importance of silat al-rahim and the importance of keeping the ties of kinship, it's under normative family situations. But in cases of abuse, that's when we pull back based upon what is needed. Allahumma salli Muhammad. Ibn Qudamah, he continues, may Allah have mercy on him. He says, now as for the rights of children, we need to know that it is natural for someone to be inclined toward taking care of our children and making sure that we're good to them and we're generous toward them. But we also have to be mindful that they have desires, and we cannot, that's what I'm looking for. We cannot abandon teaching them or teaching them adab. Because we all want to do things in the world. We all have passions. But taking care of their needs, teaching them and teaching them adab, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, save yourselves and your family from the fire. So our first obligation says that we have to take care of our family first. And the Mufassirin in this verse, they say that What that means of save your family first is that you teach them knowledge-wise who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, but also teach them adab. And as a community, we have really lost adab. SubhanAllah, today, before this class, I met with a sister who just came back from Al-Quds. She just came back from Palestine Monday. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make easier brothers in Gaza. She was in Jerusalem. She said when she went to Masjid al-Aqsa, they don't allow middle-aged men. So like teenagers to 40 years old, they're not even allowed to go. So you find a lot of women and a lot of little kids. And so one of the little boys spoke to her in Arabic, but because of the IDF, she acted like she didn't speak Arabic. And she said, I don't speak Arabic. And so one of the friends said, where are you from? She said, America. He said, it's your first time here? He said, yes. She said, he's maybe 9 years old. The little boy disappeared and came back with cookies. Said, this is for you. You're a guest here at Masjid al-Aqsa. You have cookies. When they gave her cookies, they went to all the other guests' cookies. This is adab. That a 9-year-old understood, we have a guest, we are generous to our guests. We take care of our guests. Do we have that same disposition in thought when we go visit our friends? Or is it just like, hey, what's up? Thank you, whatever. Do we compete to pay for each other's meal? Not in a performative way. Because sometimes it just becomes like culture, like, no, I got no. No, like we genuinely want to take care of our brothers and sisters. When we go to the store and buy ourselves food, do we think, man, Muhammad or Ahmed or Fatima, Khadija, maybe they didn't eat today? And so we need to really get back. And I found it very, very interesting when the saving ourselves and our family from the fire, that the Mufassirin explain that, is not just knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's also adab. It's also good manners. And that we should strive to be people of good manners. What's the hadith? Muhammad. إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. The Prophet Muhammad said that I was sent, or some have explained it to be the only reason why I was sent was to complete noble character, to teach people what good character really was. And that if we have good akhlaq, then everything in our lives will go in order. Why? Because we have good akhlaq with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we'll worship Him. If we have good akhlaq with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we'll put the sunnah over our own needs. If we have good akhlaq with our brothers and sisters, then by the nature of things, they'll have good akhlaq with us. An entire society now is better because we all have striven. We've all tried together to have good akhlaq. I think something that I had an intention to ask of ourselves when we leave this gathering, mashallah, there's far more sisters than there are brothers, but spend a minute or two getting to know someone. Ask, not that's in your normal circle, because if you look, y'all are already in your cliques. I see it. You're already bunched up with the friends that you know. Alhamdulillah, khair barakah. Now, merge your cliques. Get to know someone else. How do we start to build community if we forever remain within our friend groups and our circles? That doesn't mean this becomes your best friend that you now live the rest of your life and you go off in the sunset, but it means it's someone that you know a little bit more about. And as one of the brothers suggested last week, every week, try to ask a little bit more about them. Try to get to know them a little bit more. طيب. From the rights of the child is that the parent, Ibn Qudam continues, from the rights of the child is necessary that the parent gives their child a good name. And make sure that they do an aqiqah for them. And if they become 7, then they teach them, they command them with prayer, and they make sure that they are circumcised. Obviously now it's done different. And if they reach the age of puberty, they get them married. Allahu Akbar. Puberty. That's not actually what he says. إِذَا بَلَغ, like if you become mature. So some of you shouldn't get married. Allah musta'an. As everyone knows by now, I'm a huge proponent of early marriage, like ma'alish. طيب, and then he gets into the rights of servitude, the rights of slavery. And it's like 3 lines, very, very short. But before we read them and transition to Q&A, we have to understand that this is not talking about slavery as we perceive it in the movie Roots by Alex Haley. That's not it. It's not the transatlantic slave trade. I can say it, I'm black. Slavery in the Islamic context. Some of the ulama have even argued that Islam put in rules so that eventually slavery wouldn't exist. That's a minority opinion. But in the very least, it was there to give people rights, to us part of our social dynamics that have been there since Adam alayhi salam, forever. Well, maybe not since Adam, but forever. And so Islam meant there to make something honorable. And you can only have, someone can only become enslaved through war. There's a war, there are people left over, they become a captive, or they're the children of those captives. But we've talked about this before. And so that he says, as for the rights of an enslaved person, then we have to feed them, and we have to give them good clothing, and we have to, we don't burden them with more than they can handle, and we don't look at them in a way that makes them feel bad or makes them feel less about themselves, and that we forgive them if they've made mistakes, and remind them of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when they themselves have made mistakes in their own personal lives. And we forgive them hoping that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will have forgiveness to us. This is what the Sharia tells us how slavery should be. That we treat people good. For what about our brothers and sisters? It's interesting, this comes in the same section talking about family. Because in the traditional Islamic context, the slaves were almost a part of the family. If any of you have been overseas, the equivalent is indentured servitude. I pushed back against one of my mashayikh one time. We're in Mecca. He's talking about slavery. I said, what about the kafil system that you have over here? All the Bengali brothers and sisters, Pakistani brothers and sisters, and all the Saudis shut up. It's the same thing. That we should be good to them. SubhanAllah, Imam Ghazali, therefore Ibn Jawzi, therefore Ibn Qudamah, they put at the end of the section talking about how the rights of brotherhood, the rights of family, the rights of brotherhood, the rights of neighbors, the rights of Muslims. He talks the rights of family. And with that, in that same section, are those that are in servitude. Because they're almost a part of the family. And as I shared before in the past, my sheikh who taught me Maliki fiqh in Mecca, he was like, yo, my wife's family's from slaves, bro. We wasn't tripping off that. Matter of fact, the slaves were upset when they got rid of slavery because that was how they provided for themselves. And their family and our family interacted and intermarried. It was no big deal. And when I visited Ethiopia, for example, or the Gambia, for example, yes, there are people of different social classes, but they were all treated the same. For us in America, obviously we've abolished slavery, alhamdulillah. We should think about how it is that we treat our friends. How we treat people that we're responsible for. You want to tease this out a little bit? How do we treat our siblings? They're not directly responsible. We're not directly responsible for them, right? But they are people who we interact with. Do we feed them? Do we clothe them? Do we not give them more than they can handle? Or is it just like we're burdening them with whatever, we don't care about their well-being, whatever? How do we think about our parents? Is our adab or our disposition in and of itself a burden on them? Where I want to put my needs over the family's needs, or even worse, over their needs? How is our disposition in the expectations that we have, despite our parents breaking their backs to take care of us? But I think these are things that we all really, really, really should think about. Because if we can learn to be good to our family, then we will only be good to our friends. And if we can be good to our family, inshallah, our children will be good to us. And wallahi, 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 us being good to our family, meaning siblings, parents, extended family, etc., is only a training ground for when you actually get married. It's not the same, I promise you. But if we can learn to be kind to our mothers when they're really, really mean to us, we can be forgiving. And we can be kind to our siblings when they're really, really annoying. Then it's teaching us hilm. It's teaching us that fortitude. It's teaching us patience. It's teaching us graciousness. Wallahu alam. For next week, inshallah, we'll transition from talking about how to be with people to how to be by ourselves. How to be an uzla. Which, ironically, even though we're all so connected on our cell phones, loneliness is skyrocketing, and we find ourselves by ourselves more than not. Can we change that to have an intention that we're doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? We'll say that for next week. I just want to open the floor up for questions and comments, inshallah. Anything I said was correct from Allah alone. Anything that's incorrect from myself and shaitan.
آه